Hi guys, Romans here, and in this video I'm gonna be talking about the sounds behind the track Wrong Doors. In this series in general I'm gonna be talking about the synth and bass sounds as these were in my direction. The saxophone player did run his saxophone through my pedal board actually, and we even reamped a lot of it in the studio, but despite a few more extreme effects, at the end of the day it was a bit more subtle in the final mix so that the saxophone sounds would be more in tune with how the saxophone sounded on the first album. I'm also not gonna be talking about the keyboard sounds because they're pretty standard for the most part. Like take Wrong Doors for example, what we used for almost the entirety of it was pizzicato as a sound. That's the sound we also used on the track A Way to Oppose on the first album. The synth sounds had actually two sources from where they came. The first one was Korg Minilogue XD, definitely one of the most, if not the most popular synthesizer on the market in like last 2 or 3 years. I really love synthesizers and I basically bought it for the sake of recording the second album, and we used two sounds from that. The synth comes loaded with 200 presets, which is quite a lot, and the first one is called Replicant because it has that iconic sound from Blade Runner. Blade Runner is one of the most iconic soundtracks written by Vangelis, and you know, the sounds from it are just extremely iconic, and that preset was used in the chorus. I think it goes on to show how versatile and useful that sound is, because I don't think when you're listening to Wrong Doors and the chorus comes in, your first thought would be, that's the Blade Runner sound. And the second sound that I've used was in that riff section after the second chorus. Originally when I recorded it, the synth was playing the same stuff as the saxophone and the bass, so basically that chromatic riff. And this is what I think most of the rock and metal bands would do, that all of the instruments would just play the same riff. Kind of makes sense, even though it's not very original, and when I heard that part with the synth playing basically the same thing, it felt not very creative, and I wanted something unexpected there, and that's where I used the second sound from Korg Minilogue XD. And this was one of the sounds that I had from some of the packs that I bought from the users, you know, that created some additional sounds. And I didn't want to be limited just by the 200 default presets. I wanted something more experimental. And there was this sound called 11, which I think is referring to the Stranger Things. And it's basically an arpeggiator of sorts. Very interesting sound that I synced the tempo of the track and I was just playing with the cutoff, and it creates sonically something that I don't think you would expect in a part like that, and it adds like that electronic vibe to it. The second source of the synth sounds was the pedal effect called Zoya from the Empress Effects. If you are a pedal nerd, you know what I'm talking about. If not, Zoya is probably the most revolutionary pedal ever made. It's a pedal that can be really anything. It can be as simple as a flanger effect, but it can be a whole pedal board. You can create synth from it. It's really good if you are familiar with modular synthesis, which is something I'm very interested in, but I haven't had time to really go down that rabbit hole yet. You can basically create anything in there. You are just limited by your knowledge and by your imagination. I'm using the Arturia key step, which is a MIDI controller connected to my pedal board through Boss ES8, and I'm controlling Zoya as a synth. I created this synth called 80s Warm Synth. You can find it on the patch storage if you are using Zoya. And I followed the YouTube tutorial. I basically followed all of the steps, but then I tweaked the synth to sound more to my liking. So it's really that detuned traditional 80s synth. Very nice sound. And I actually made a pretty big mistake because I didn't save the sound when I was recording the demo. So we lifted that from the demo. And basically that patch that I put on patch storage, I just tweaked it a little bit so that it has faster attack and stuff like that, and I recorded the demo with it, but I didn't save exactly how the patch was created. So it took me actually a couple hours to dial it back in, and even now I think it's only like from 90% like the original. comes to the bass sounds, I would say that Wrong Doors is one of the simpler tracks. For almost the entirety of the track, I was using the combo of Kali 76 compact bass compressor with the B7K overdrive / preamp from the Dark Glass Electronics. This is the combo that I've used a lot on the first album as well, on the tracks like We're Building Our Own Monument, Way to Oppose, Pilgrim in Doubt, Cortex Labyrinthus, or Don't Give Up That Dream. I did, however, change the setting of the overdrive in the bridge. When I had the original really heavy overdrive on it, the whole bridge just didn't sound very right. There's a lot of notes being played and they just didn't have enough space, in my opinion, when they had this really heavy overdrive on them. So I changed the setting so that it has more subtle overdrive, but more of that preamp, so it's darker but punchier sound than the bass through the compressor on its own. When it comes to the live situation, I'm just turning off the overdrive, but you'll be able now to hear how it sounds on the recording and how it sounds when it's just the compressor and the bass. A completely different sound is in the middle, where I run my bass guitar through a ring modulator from the Strymon Mobius and tape delay from the Ecosystem, from the Empress Effects. Ecosystem is actually the most heavily used pedal on my album. I've used, I think, like 11 presets on the entire record, and it's a delay pedal, so that's like a lot of presets. So an interesting thing about this section in particular is that we lifted it from the demo. The thing is that when I started re-recording it, I couldn't get the same sound as I had on the demo. Even though I had the same pedal combinations, same presets and everything, it just didn't sound the same. I was trying to get exactly that sound for I think like an hour or 2 hours, and I couldn't get it. And I couldn't understand why it's not the same. And the reason was actually quite simple. When I recorded the demo, I had different strings. I had DR, the neon strings, you know, those that kind of shine under a black light. I had the blue ones. And when I was recording bass for the album, I had DR strings, either high beams or low beams, I don't remember now. It just shows how much of a difference strings can make. Now you'll be able to hear the part from the demo, which also made it to the final recording, and the one I re-recorded, and how much of a difference there is. And also the bass is basically the combination of the affected signal through my pedal board along with the clean tone mic'd through my bass amp, as you can see on the photo. There's one interesting thing I kind of forgot to mention, so I'm shooting this additionally. When it comes to the saxophone and Wrong Doors, the saxophone is really heavily featured in this track. There are more tracks like that, but if you look at Wrong Doors, you know, it's there in the riff, in the verses, basically playing the same stuff with all of the instruments. There's a little bit of it in the bridge, it is in the chorus, there's the solo, but when it comes to that really cool mid section, it's maybe strangely absent. Why is that? So originally when I was writing this track and making the demo, I wanted the saxophone to be in that part as well, basically playing the riffs with me in that 9/4 time signature. And when Lucas came to the studio, he actually did record it. So now you'll be able to hear a very raw recording from the studio, so before mixing and editing and all of that. And especially when he recorded that second part where we go from 9/4 to 7/4. The moment he stopped recording, he was like, dude, this is horrible. Don't put the saxophone there. It sounds absolutely bad. I gotta say, it sounded quite different from what I originally thought it was gonna sound like. You know, I had a different sound in my head, and I was a bit underwhelmed and I was a bit disappointed, but considering that this whole mid section was basically lifted from the demo and it really worked perfectly the way it was, the lesson to be learned here is that if it ain't broke, why fix it? And that's basically why the saxophone isn't really featured there, and I think it gives certain dynamics to the track, like a variety of sound, because then when the saxophone solo comes in, it comes in with much more power than it would have if the saxophone was playing all along, you know.